Alright, so now that we have our clean pruning shears, we're just going to come right in here. We're just going to come as close as we can without touching the main stem. We're just going to clip it right off. Now I'm going to put this to the side, as I am going to put these in the compost afterwards, because I'm not wasting all this good green material. Hello and welcome back to Gardening with Gibson. Today I am going to walk you guys through the things that I do for general tomato care, including preventing blight on your tomato plants, which can actually ruin the tomato plant significantly, especially if it's significantly humid and has been raining a lot. You definitely want to do everything you can to prevent blight. It's particularly more common in heirloom varieties that have not been bred to be blight resistant. So why don't I take you guys over to my indeterminate tomato plants, and I can first update you on the progress of how they've been doing. So as you can see, these tomato plants have gotten much bigger since my last video. They're probably, I would say they're about 4 feet tall right now, approximately. They will continue to get much larger throughout the season. So again, just a quick reminder, if you haven't seen my other videos, this right here is a cherry tomato plant. This one is a Prudence Purple, which is a new variety that I am going to be trying this year. And these two are San Marzano tomato plants. There's the other guy right in there. If you actually look here, you can actually see that I have a bunch of tomatoes growing already. So this is the perfect time to actually prune this tomato plant, which is what we're going to be starting with today. So I'm going to set you guys up on the tripod, and I'm going to show you how I am going to trim this tomato plant. The first thing that I am going to show you guys here is how to identify the suckers on an indeterminate tomato plant. So we are going to get right up in this tomato plant. If you can see right here, we have our, sorry, there's some leaves in the way. If you can see right here, this is our main stem, and this is the branch that's coming off of it. Now this stem in the middle is what is called the sucker. Now this sucker has the potential to turn into its own tomato plant and will often produce its even own suckers. So what you want to do, even though there are some flowers that are blooming on here, you do want to trim these off, as it will send more nutrients to your tomatoes that way, and therefore you will get a bigger yield of tomatoes rather than this plant just getting absolutely gigantic. So I am going to show you the first step that you need to do before you trim any of your tomato plants. So the first thing that you want to do here is choose your pruning tools. I have two different ones here. These ones they're probably about a $10 pair of pruners. I use these for the smaller, thinner branches that don't require those big gigantic ones to actually cut it off without ripping the skin of the tomato plant. And of course these are just some Fiskars titanium. They're actually the cheaper model. You can use whatever you want. You can even use those cheap Chinesium $10 ones if you really want to. So before we actually trim anything though, I am going to go ahead and wash these. I personally wash these after every single tomato plant that I cut, just in case that tomato plant does have an infection. You won't be spreading it to the other ones. So as you can see right here, I have two bowls. One is just some soap and water, and the other one is just plain water. So I'm going to go ahead and wash both of these thoroughly in the soap and water dish, and then I'm going to rinse them off. in the water, and we are going to get to trimming these plants. Alright, so you're just going to go ahead and get this in here like this. Give it a quick wipe. Make sure not to cut yourself when you're doing this, because they actually are still quite sharp. And then we're just going to splash it around in the water here to get all that excess soap off. Oh, and not drop it in the ledge. Rinse that again. And then we're going to take our other ones and do the same thing. I'm going to give them a quick wash. And then we're going to rinse them. It's really as simple as that. You don't got to do too much. Just a quick wash just to make sure you're not spreading disease from plant to plant. Alright, so now that we have our clean pruning shears, we're just going to come right in here. We're just going to come as close as we can without touching the main stem. We're just going to clip it right off. Now I'm going to put this to the side, as I am going to put these in the compost afterwards, because I'm not wasting all this good green material. So I am just going to go ahead here and trim the rest of these tomato plants. Before I do that though, a quick note here. Normally with these tomato plants, I leave at least one sucker. However, this one I have not done that yet, because most of the suckers have been growing out this way instead of going out this way or this way, which is not what I want. So I want a sucker that is going to grow out the way of this line here. So it's probably going to end up being this one up here, which is a little bit higher up the plant on what I would like. However, sometimes you just got to work with what you got. So this is probably going to be the sucker that I keep. Or actually, you know what? Now that I look further, there's a guy right here that I might be able to manipulate straight up along this way here. So yeah, I will see you guys after I am done trimming this tomato plant, so you can see what it looks like. So this particular tomato plant, I actually didn't trim that much off of. Just kind of these ones right down in here, as I have already trimmed this tomato plant a couple times throughout the season. So it's actually being pretty healthy. One thing that I am going to do at the end of this video though is I am going to clean this up. As you can see, this is actually quite loose, and this tomato plant is kind of flopping all over the place, which I really don't like. So I am going to redo those twine lengths so that they're much tighter than they are. So the next tomato plant that we are going to work on is actually right here. As you can see, there is a branch that broke off here. So I think that actually happened with the wind, but because this is basically dying now, we're just going to go ahead and trim this off right here. And if you look closely, there is actually, focus, if it would focus, a sucker right there that's growing out. So that will actually become the new branch for this, as on this particular tomato plant, as you can see down here, this is the one sucker that I actually decided to keep. Whereas any of these other ones, like this guy right up in here, I am going to be cutting off. So I am going to finish up on all these tomato plants, and I will be back with you guys in a minute. Alright, so here are the branches that I trimmed off. As you can see, there are some tomatoes in there, but you really don't need to be concerned with that, because the overall benefit that your tomato plant is going to have from this far outweighs the amount that you're cutting off it. Trust me, you will get a lot more tomatoes on your indeterminate tomato plants if you trim off the suckers. It does work. So now I am going to show you what these plants look like now. As you can see, I trimmed some decent sections off of them. It's a little bit less bushy now, which will actually also help with the wind blowing through it, because the more dense that your indeterminate tomato plants are, the more likely they are to get blight and other fungal diseases, which is something that you absolutely, under all circumstances, want to prevent. So now I want to talk to you guys about some of the things that I do early on in my tomato plant development to prevent blight. One of the first things that I do, which you can't actually see in this process, but when the tomatoes are still seedlings, is I will go ahead and I will spray them with a solution of water and aspirin. I use a little bit more than what is recommended, but essentially I buy some aspirin and I put about an eighth to a quarter of a tablet in 500 milliliters of water in a spray bottle, and then I will spray my tomato seedlings probably until they're about a foot high. The reason why I spray my tomato plants with water and aspirin is because the main compound in aspirin is salicylic acid, which happens to also be the main chemical that the tomato plants produce in their immune system. So by spraying them with the solution with the salicylic acid in it, this will actually boost the immune system of the tomato plant, helping it fight off any fungal diseases. As you can see, there's no blight on those tomato plants. However, there is a tiny bit on this guy. Nothing to really be concerned with, which leads me to the next thing that I want to talk to you about. If you do start to get blight like that, if it starts to affect a lot of the leaves, then what you can do is purchase a product called sodium bicarbonate. It's like a white powder. I get it from my local Ontario grower supply. Basically, you just mix it with water and you put it in a sprayer and you spray it on the tomato plant, and it kills any fungus that's growing on the tomato plant. The next thing is, as you can see down here, I have actually trimmed up these tomato plants quite high. In this particular case, I've done about a foot up, and that really is to just make sure that none of these leaves are touching the ground, because that is a big no-no when it comes to tomato plants. You do not want leaves touching the dirt, and you do not want dirt splashing up on the leaves in a hard rain. Now, the next thing that I do to prevent disease in my tomato plants is I mulch. This here is actually straw. At the beginning of the season, I was using just a regular old bale of straw, which I actually have over there under my wheelbarrow just to keep it dry. Here, I'll show you. It's right there under my wheelbarrow. That way it stays nice and dry. It will get a little bit wet, but not really a concern. And then this year I actually realized that PB Mart, which previously used to be TSC stores, the Tractor Supply store, actually sells a refined, already chopped up straw. So it doesn't have any seeds in it. You can see it here, this kind of thinner stuff here. This is actually the mulched up stuff, which I've already put on top. This stuff is only $11 or $10 a bag. I think it's for 3 cubic yards, so you really cannot beat that price. It's a steal. It will last you a long time. Don't screw around. Get some mulch. Mulch your tomato plants. Now, lastly, and one of the most important things that you want to do to prevent blight in your tomato plants is spacing. As you can see, these tomato plants here are about 3 feet away from each other at the base, and from here to here they're probably about 2 to 2.5 feet away from each other. Now, this space will allow good airflow to flow between them and not make it so that the plants are overcrowding each other too much. Before we end today's video, as I promised, I am going to go ahead and fix up this twine. I'm not going to immediately cut off what I have on there. What I'm actually just going to do is going to go ahead and tie new stuff right on, and then cut the old stuff off after. That way the tomato plant doesn't flop over. So I will be back with you guys after that's done and show you the final product. So as you can see, that is tightened up a lot much better now. I even did the whole way, the rest of the way up, to make sure that it's nice and tight, that the plants are not falling all over the place now. So if you notice that with yours, one tip that I would do to make sure that your Florida weed trellis is nice and good is to pre-plan out how tall and how many rows of twine you're going to have on your trellis. Because if you actually start from the top, and then work your way down, it will stay tight the whole way along. The problem with this particular system that I have set up, which is the only problem that I've found, is that up there at the top, like all the way up there, it's just kind of leaning in. So if you start from the bottom like I did and work your way up, you have to be very mindful not to keep tying them tighter and tighter as you go, as it will pull the poles in and the bottom ones will just get looser because of that. So if you're doing it from the bottom to the top and you don't want to pre-plan out, just do it just tight. Don't pull it too hard. You just want to do it barely tight so it's a nice consistency the whole way up the line. So now that I have talked to you guys about what I do for tomato care, I hope that you guys will take these examples and do it yourselves in your own gardens. I cannot underestimate how important it is to take the right steps to make sure that your tomatoes are nice and healthy throughout the entire season. Depending on where you live, this may not be as much of an issue as some areas. Like, for example, if you live in some of the parts of the US where it does not rain as much, or maybe even the parts of Canada where it does not rain as much, you might not have as much of an issue with this. But anywhere where you have a very humid and moist climate, it's going to be a struggle for you to keep blight away from your tomato plants. I wish you all luck in your garden, and please like and subscribe.